Hey everybody, Brendan here, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be looking at the Game of the Year for 2001. This was a really exciting one, played between Garry Kasparov and Peter Leko, two of the top players in the world at that time. And you could probably still call them some of the top players in the world still, despite them being of the last few generations. So let's get into it. Kasparov opened up with e4. Leko played e5. We see knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Although this is in my repertoire, I swear I'm not choosing games that are my favorite or that I think are best just based on the things that I play. It just so happens that both games that I've covered so far, I covered 2000 first, and now I'm covering 2001. Both games are Ruy Lopez's so far. So we see a6, bishop to a4, knight to f6, castles, and bishop to e7. There's a few options here. There's also bishop c5, which is the classical or maybe even the Moeller, depending on what you get. So those are also important to know. Of course, the open Ruy is such a difficult one as well, so just keep those in mind. But yeah, bishop to e7 was chosen, so this is going to be a natural closed Ruy Lopez. Rook e1, b5, and bishop to b3. So the nice move order part here is that if you end up castling as white, you have to be concerned about wanting to play c3. This is what most people would want to play here, c3 and then d4, but then you get met with the Marshall, and well, this has been drawn out an insane amount, and most top players with the white side refuse to go into it these days. So, okay, a4 was played instead, attacking the b5 pawn. Bishop to b7. Of course, something has to be done. If you make some silly move that kind of also looks natural, like h6 or even d6, then of course you lose the b5 pawn because of the pin on the a file here. So that would be no good. So bishop to b7. We see d3. d6, knight b to d2, knight a5, and bishop to a2. So you're not really too worried of this pawn being taken because, well, you're taking away from the center, and also there's so much compensation with these types of moves. For example, knight f1, c5, knight e3, bishop c6. If you really try to hold on to it, sometimes there's these situations where you can play moves like b3 and just permanently go down the pawn, but you have so much pressure on the a file, it's ridiculous. So b3 is definitely something to still consider. For example, if they play some random move like h6, I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't looked at this too in depth, but I wouldn't be surprised that b3 is just best here. Or after takes, you can just take on a5, for example, and play something like this with not rook a4, unfortunately, but like rook a2 or something, queen a1. Even rook a3 doesn't look ridiculous as well. To go potentially queen a1, you have a lot of activity here. But generally those lines are kind of scary for black, so black doesn't really go into them. c5 was played instead, of course. This is the main line. Knight to f1, rook to e8, and rook to e8 was a bit interesting. b4 is the most popular move here, and knight e3 to g3 or g3 are both playable moves, and it's just a matter of preference. The knight on g3 is, of course, intending to pretty much just stay over there, going to f5 and also covering h5, but the knight on e3 also covers the d5 square, which is quite nice. So there's I don't know, but the problem is it blocks in the c1 bishop, so there's an argument for both. Instead, rook e8 was played. Now we see knight to e3, h6, bishop to d2, just to keep an eye on this knight, c4. And another thing that bishop d2 is doing isn't just to keep an eye on the knight, it's also to go bishop to c3. And all of a sudden, you could see some sort of d4 being played, and hey, this bishop's on a very good diagonal. Of course, you can't quite play it because e4 is hanging in these lines, so you got to be really, really careful about that. But it's really good to point out. And hey, who knows, maybe queen to d2 might be annoying at some point to target this knight again. So here we see queen b6, knight to d2. And at this point, I want you to be very, very conscious of exactly how this kingside knight moved. Okay, so it's made 2 moves so far. All of white's pieces are playing somewhat of a role. The only one that maybe you disagree on is this rook or this bishop on a2, which is a little bit out of the game for the moment. Won't be for long though. But yeah, the rook on a1. But it's also, it's on the file that could open at any moment here. But the fascinating part of this game, and the reason why I chose it, is because of the maneuver of this knight. So let's keep that in mind. Knight to c6, knight to d5. And this move is extremely helpful because it's also facilitating some sort of taking on c4 when the time is right, where e4 is no longer weak. So knight takes d4, e takes, d5, my apologies. E takes d5, knight to a5. And funny move here, bishop takes a5, which actually makes a ton of sense here. So after queen takes and d takes c4, there's kind of only one move. And I've analyzed this position quite a bit, and I've tried to find something that wasn't completely ugly. But these positions are so hard for black to hold. I think the only move is just b4. Only move. And it has to do with trying to shut out this bishop. If you do not shut out the bishop, you are lost, essentially. I think it is actually just lost. So with b4, we have to look at a ton of stuff. This was not played in the game, so we'll get to that in a moment. But after b4, queen to f3. And there's a few interesting options here. I was thinking g6 was interesting. But there's actually a really good argument for g4, just preventing f5 the best you can. Rook to f8, if you try continuing, then knight e4. f5 anyways, takes. G takes probably looks like the most logical. Like, rook takes is also pretty good, but to me, g takes is the most natural, because this kind of looks like one of those King's Indian structures. Knight g3, bishop g5, and you get something like this, and it's extremely messy. h4 is coming, but yeah, complete mess. But I think white is preferred here, so I don't think g6 is actually the right call immediately. Rook to f8 actually looks a little bit better. Now g4 is not so great, because since you didn't play g6, there's not really any of those weaknesses. You could probably just go bishop c8, and I actually don't think black's any worse here. This could be proving to be more of a weakness than anything, because who knows, maybe h5 comes, like a pawn sacrifice like this. This is not unusual here. So yeah, that's not really great, because again, g6 is like weakening their king even further. So if they don't even have to worry about that, then that's a bit of a problem. Also, after bishop c8, f5 is pretty hard to stop. So yeah, rook to f8, queen to d3 now is what we have to look at. g4 of course doesn't work, so bishop to c8, and now f4 is a really good attempt, because you might be actually going f5 to get a lot more kingside space, and there's also an argument for taking, because, well, then you can maybe activate this bishop finally. So we have to be careful here as black, and there's a very narrow path to, I don't even know if it's equalizing. I don't think it is, though. So e4, knight takes e4, bishop to f5, bishop to b3. And the idea of bishop to b3, although this bishop is like pretty bad, it's doing a really important job of just kind of holding the fort over here, while white's going to take over the e-file. And black essentially, I believe, has to trade a pair of rooks, and if they don't, they're going to be much worse. So rook ae8 is, I think rook fe8 was showing up in the engine. I just didn't believe it. Rook ae8 feels much more natural, and there's a good reason why. I actually want the rook still on f8 at the end of the day, because I feel like that's just much better than the rook on a8, because what we're going to have to likely do is remaneuver this bishop to b6. So let's just see how. So g3, for example, I looked at a few things here. There was queen c7, there was bishop takes e4 and bishop to d8. So king g2, Rook takes e4, rook takes e4. Of course, you cannot play rook e8 because we can take it with check, so that's no good. But now bishop to f6. We give up the b2 pawn, but it's not really advised to take it. So queen c5 instead. This is actually really important because you actually want to have the option of whether it's like queen d4 or even this bishop d8 to b6 maneuver. These things you just kind of need. So h4, bishop takes b2 now, h5, a5, queen to f3 getting out of the way, and you enter something like this. And this didn't look so bad to me, but it's also really hard to find an active plan for black because everything's kind of tied up. Like their rook on f8, I personally believe is better than if it were on a8 here because a5's covered, so that's not really a big deal. Some of the dark squares are weak, so it's hard to imagine any immediate obvious counterplay. But there is ideas of like bishop f6 to d8 to b6. I think this could be quite strong. So that's an option. But going into this line, it's just so unclear if it's going to be good from so far away. Another thing we have to look at is after queen to d3, bishop c8, f4, e4. Like this is e4 is pretty much the only try here. Knight takes e4, bishop f5, bishop e3, rook e8, and g3, which we've seen before. So we looked at bishop d8. So bishop takes e4 immediately, is good to point out. Takes queen c5 check, king g2, bishop f6, rook e1. And we kind of enter a similar scenario here with bishop takes b2. So that's another way to get to it. And then the last one is queen c7. So queen c7, king to g2, bishop to d8, trying to get potentially one trade going. But the problem is c5 here. And after takes, queen takes c5, rook e1 takes, and rook takes on e4. The fact that the c-pawn is gone is actually a really good thing for us. You never know if it's going to go to c4. You can imagine a dream of like rook e2, queen f3, somehow the bishop gets to d3, and all of the problems are solved, and white could be unraveling very, very quickly here. So it's very unclear whether or not this is actually okay for black, but my intuition says it's not. So yeah, those are all of the lines. b4 is kind of necessary to shut out the bishop, essentially. But Leko ended up taking on a4. All right, now we're going to get to the fun stuff, I promise, because maybe that wasn't so fun for you guys. But c5, queen to b4. Of course, you have to watch out. Like, for example, if takes, then there's d6, followed by bishop takes f7 at the end of the day, because this queen is poorly placed. So instead, queen b4 was played, and then knight to e4. So again, so far it's gone knight f3 to d2 to e4. Not so impressive. Like, it's a good square, but why is this game one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game from 2001? Well, we'll see. So queen takes b2 was played. By now it's already lost. I'm fairly convinced after taking on a4 in this position it is lost, and that's due to the maneuver you'll see. So queen takes b2 was played. The problem is it's actually really hard to find another move because there's all ideas of c3 as well. Like, for example, if you take c3, if you take on b2, then there is rook to e2, and then there's this d6 again, which is a consistent theme. That's a problem. So that's why queen takes b2 immediately was played. But now take on d6, bishop to f8, and c3 again. And again, there's these rook e2 problems if you're not careful. So in the game, what was played is f5, and this knight's not going to move yet because, of course, we can make greater threats, which is d7, rook e to d8, and of course, what we wanted to do was play d6 check or d6 in these positions, so rook e2 becomes stronger, and of course, d6 check was played. King h8. And now it's finally time to move this knight, because now the queen can go to a3 because there's no discovery that's actually extremely useful for us. So no reason to have it in the position right now, because there's a much nicer way to continue. Knight to c5, and okay, knight f3, d2, e4, c5. Now it's getting a little interesting, right? This knight's moving quite a bit. It's moved 27, and 4 of the moves were with the knight. Not a lot, but we're going to see that's going to change for the rest of the game. The rest of the game, that's right. So bishop c6 was played. Now knight to d3 attacking the queen. You have to respond to it. Queen takes c3. Knight takes e5. And now there's a problem. This knight is extremely strong. It just went from f3, not to e5, but from f3 to d2 to e4 to c5 to d3 to e5. And it's not going to change anymore. So bishop to e4 was played. There's not really a defense. Knight f7 check. King h7, and then knight to g5. And black ended up resigning here because this is just winning by force now. So the problem is if you take on g5, there's queen h5 checkmate. And unfortunately, if you ignore and go king h8, you can actually just take on e4 and play queen to d5. And you're threatening both a mate on g8 as well as, like, actually just that's it. There's not a way to defend it, though, because this bishop is stuck. If the move like g6 or g5 was played, maybe it'd be a different story. Like, you know, the queen can go back, but it can't. And for that reason, it's actually just lost. So the knight just made a trillion moves and then just traded off for the bishop on e4, and now it's winning because you have to move the bishop, give it up, and lose the game. And that's actually why Peter Leko ended up resigning after knight to g5. So again, to finish things off, I think it would be nice to mention this knight maneuver one last time, which is knight f3 to d2 to e4 to c5 to d3 to e5 to f7 to g5. 31 moves, and I believe 7 or 8 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 moves were with the knight. And the next one, if you don't take the knight, will be the knight move again. So it would have been 8 after king h8. So that's pretty crazy to me that actually worked out. But it was really interesting because this was all sound. These moves all made sense. It was just improving the knight, bringing it to squares it wanted to go to, taking advantage of the light squares, specifically f7, as well as g5, taking advantage specifically, especially of these light squares where this knight can't be taken. It's just a monster. So yeah, absolutely fascinating game. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and that's going to cover it for my favorite game of 2001. Well, I guess I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.